Of course, everything works out exactly as we want it to. Of course, life gets to be easy. This is one of my favorite practices because this works with your subconscious mind, the quantum field, and your own energy to shift outcomes to what you want them to be. So we'll do a couple of different examples today, but you can use this in absolutely any area of your life to manifest love, money, career, like whatever it is that you want. This is a really powerful way to manifest and change and shift the energy around something. So say, for example, let's talk about boundaries. Say you're going to start setting some boundaries, and that can be really difficult for a lot of people. It can feel really uncomfortable. And you can be very fearful about how someone might respond to your boundaries. So if I were to use boundaries and I wanted to create, of course, statements that would help me to reprogram my mind and work with the energy in the quantum field to shift how the other person responds, I would start off by just taking a couple of deep breaths, sinking into the present moment, deep breaths to settle my nervous system. And then I would start saying, of course, statements that support the outcome that I want. Of course, setting boundaries is easy. Of course, Bob accepts my boundaries. Of course, everyone responds to my boundaries pleasantly. Everyone is excited about my boundaries. I feel excited about my boundaries. I'm safe to set my boundaries. My boundaries are creating space for me to receive more. I know that every time I set a boundary, I am abundantly rewarded. Every time I stand in my power and I use my voice, I am abundantly rewarded. Every single time I set a boundary, I am elevating my self-worth and I am signaling to God, source, spirit, the universe that I am ready for more. Of course, people are okay with my boundaries. Of course, they accept them. They don't even question them. Of course, it's easy to set. It actually gets to be fun. The more I set my boundaries, the more easy it gets, the more I don't even have to do it because my energy changes and it changes the way people respond to me in the beginning. But of course, when I first start setting boundaries, it's going to be easy. Of course, when I first start setting boundaries, I'm going to know exactly how to do it. Of course, the other people I'm setting boundaries with are going to know that I'm doing it with love. And so you start to just, of course, statements. And because you do that, you're retraining your subconscious that that is the only outcome you will accept. And you keep doing that no matter what, because it does take the subconscious like a little bit of time to anchor in a new belief system. Because if boundaries have been really scary or really difficult, or it's brand new to you, then we got to retrain the subconscious. So in the beginning, you might set the boundary and have, someone meet you with resistance or someone not understand, but you keep doing these of course statements. And you do it anytime the fear comes into your head, right? So if you're getting ready to set a boundary and you're feeling anxious, you would go into your of course statements. If later you're in the kitchen and you're doing the dishes and all of a sudden you have a thought about like, ooh, I hope that person's not mad at me. It's like, no, of course they respect my boundaries. Of course they understand. Like, of course they received them. And you keep doing it. And eventually that is not only your belief system, it is the literal outcome that you experience. So another one we're going to do it with, and this works with absolutely everything. Like this has worked to help people leave narcissistic dynamics that they've been terrified to leave because they're afraid that that person will financially control them or take the money away or the support or whatever it is. And these, of course, statements literally work with the quantum field and it shifts how the other person responds. Like you literally can change your reality with these. They're so powerful. Let's do one about being seen. Okay. So whether you're here to share your story, your book, your art, your content, whatever, let's tap into that because it can be scary to overcome that fear. So again, you just get quiet, calm the nervous system down. Of course, I am safe to be seen. The more I show up, the more people love me. Of course, I am able to use my voice easily. Of course, when I speak my truth, other people receive it with love. Of course, people want to hear what I have to say. Of course, my content goes viral. Of course, my book is a bestseller. Of course, the publishers want to give me a book deal. Of course, my podcast takes off. Of course, everything I want is so easy. Every time I share my story, every time I step into my truth and I share it with the world, I'm abundantly rewarded. Of course, this gets to be easy. Of course, it gets to be fun. Of course, every time I post my content, it is going viral. Of course, every chapter I write in this book is changing people's lives. Of course, and of course, and of course, and of course. And you just go through whatever the opposite is of the fears that maybe you're holding or whatever intrusive thoughts are maybe coming up around sharing. So especially if you're concerned with being rejected, of course people love me. Of course everybody loves my content. Of course, the more people that see my content, the more people want to follow me. Of course, when they read my book and they read my story, they understand me better. Of course, they understand themselves better. Of course, they see themselves in my story. Of course they want to read more. Of course they love it. Of course. And you start just going, of course, of course, of course. And it's so powerful to shift all of the energy. So I would suggest taking, whatever your 2 to 3 biggest fears or resistances are in this process, and creating of course statements. And the first time you do it, you want to get quiet, relax the nervous system. And then you want to start to think about what are you afraid of, and then say the opposite. Of course, everyone loves me. Of course, everyone accepts me. Of course, and create them. You might want to write them down. Maybe you write them down and record them in a voice note so that you can listen to them and you can chant along with it. Maybe you're just going to develop them in the moment and you're going to remember them. Whatever the system is that works for you, I would do that for your like 2 to 3 biggest fears. Did you hear that horn out there? That's a blazing confirmation. But I would do that for your 2 to 3 biggest fears. And then as other things come up that might be difficult for you to process, you can create more of course statements. And eventually these will fall off because you'll no longer need them because you will be experiencing that outcome. So you'll no longer be afraid to set boundaries. You'll be excited. You'll no longer be afraid to share your story, your voice, your content, your music, your art, whatever it is. You will be excited to do it. You will be looking forward to it. So, create your of course statements, have them handy, and then in the moment when that intrusive thought comes in that says, oh, I don't want to set that boundary. Oh, that feels uncomfortable. Oh, I don't know if I'm ready to hit the post button. I don't know if I'm ready to submit my book, whatever it is. In that moment, you stop and you go right into your of course statement. So again, it's best if you're saying them, but even if you're listening to your own recording of your of course statements, that works as well. Just make sure you use them as often as you need to. And I usually spend, I would say like 1 to 2 minutes in my of course statements when a fear comes up. You can stay there longer. I would stay there until you start to feel the energy shift within yourself, because when the energy shifts within yourself on a quantum level, it changes like the actual particles. And so that goes out into the sphere. Then we've got that hitting whoever or whatever you're doing, right? Whether it's the social media following, whether it's the publishers or it's the person you're setting boundaries with, but it's also shifting the energy around you. And again, when you can shift this energy, the universe has no choice but to reflect that back to you. So use them as often as possible, and know in the beginning that we're also retraining your subconscious. So even if you do them and it doesn't work right away and someone still responds negatively to your boundaries, or the content doesn't go viral or whatever it is, give yourself grace, because you're retraining a lifetime of a negative thought, a negative belief system that has kept you stuck. So part of breaking free is being patient enough to retrain your own subconscious. So you've got this. Of course you've got this. Of course it'll be easy. Of course it'll work. Of course it'll be fast. Of course it'll be fun. And I'm sending you all so much love.